All right, so correlational research is used to detect naturally occurring relationships, so seeing how one variable can potentially predict another through data. In this, we are collecting data, but we're not manipulating anything, and we're just trying to see, is there any sort of relationship? Now we're going to cover this more in stats, but let's get some of the basics right now on our correlational research notes page. So when we are measuring the relationship and correlation, a lot of times we're going to start with collecting all the data and we can visualize it using a scatter plot. So this is we're going to graph out how each variable is for each instance that we're observing, and it is usually going to create some clusters of dots. If there's a relationship between them, we're going to see closer clusters, and a lot of times it will go along a slope, either positive or negative, very much like you see in your math class. So this slope is going to tell us the direction of the relationship. If they are going together, then we're going to have a positive correlation. So if we're having one variable increase and the other variable increases, that is going to be positive. Same if when one decreases, the other decreases. So you can see this in a lot of different words. So increase can be literally the word increase or more or higher. And decrease words are going to be things like lower, less, decrease. So when we have a positive relationship, we are going to see it go in a positive upward trajectory, just like if you were to have a positive slope in your math class. For a negative correlation, instead of the variables moving together in the same direction, they're going to move in opposite directions. So as one variable increases, the other is going to decrease. And if the first variable decreases, the other is going to increase. We'll have a negative slope, just like in math class. So we will cover it again more in stats, but one thing you really need to know is that how correlational coefficients work. Correlational coefficients are a statistical representation of the relationship between two variables. It is going to tell us the strength using a number, and that number is always going to fall within the absolute value of 0 to 1. So you'll never have any sort of correlation that's like a -2 or a -100. It's always going to be between 0 and 1. And the positive and negative symbol, that's going to be there to indicate the direction. So if you see a r equals a positive number, we're going to have a positive correlation where one variable increases, the other increases. And if it's negative, we're going to have it where one variable increases and the other decreases, or vice versa. So I have some little practice ones here. I want you to think about what kind of relationship do the following correlations have. All right, go ahead, pause it, and see if you can identify the direction and the strength. I've got a little chart here. You don't have to memorize it. Just knowing sort of how close things are to 0 and 1 will help. My biggest tip is covering up the number or the positive or negative sign to help you break down the two parts of this. So go ahead, pause, try it out. All right, now that you've tried it out, I'm trusting you. All right, a plus 0.78 is going to be a positive relationship because we have that plus sign there, and it is going to be a fairly strong relationship, right, because it's closer to 1. So a positive, moderately strong relationship. When it comes to B, right, that is also a positive relationship, but since it's closer to 0, it's going to be a weak positive relationship. And when it comes to C, right, this one is a negative relationship, and it is more on the moderately weak side, right? It's close to that 0.5 in the middle, but it's still a bit on the weaker end. So what kind of relationships would have these? Can you think of any? All right, we'll be going over more of those in class. Now, remember, correlation cannot prove causation, right? As a teacher, a lot of times I notice 8th period scores are often better than 1st period. That means 8th periods are just always the best, right? Well, there's many different things that could go in here, right? Could be anything from students are more awake later in the day to students with 8th period don't have an off period. Maybe they're just better students, the kind of people that have 8th period classes, right? Or it could be that those 1st, 2nd, 3rd period students are saying something about quizzes and tests to those 8th period students. There's other things that could be going on. right? One of the big things that is a problem that I need you to know this vocabulary word is a confounding variable. Right? These are factors other than the independent variable that might produce effects in an experiment. So it can be something that is actually the true cause of changes in both variables. So let's start with this example here. Students who grew up in homes with more books have higher SAT scores. What could be a cause of this? Well, students who are in homes with more books, maybe their family values education more, right? Resulting in higher SAT scores. Maybe they are people who have better time reading, right? They enjoy reading more, they have more practice in it, so the English sections on the SAT are going to be a lot easier for them and they have higher scores. Or, books can be expensive, right? The more books you have in your home could be an indicator of income. And having higher income means maybe you hire an SAT tutor or get an SAT course. So, we're going to talk about some more common confounding variables in class, but it is important for us to think about whenever we're seeing a correlational relationship, there may be other variables at play, right? And so in order to truly prove what's going on, we would want to run a controlled experiment to determine true causation. All right. Our last research method that we're looking at is a meta-analysis. So this is not necessarily conducting your own individual research and collecting participants. Instead, you're going to combine the results of many different research studies that are similar to be able to draw relationships and determine them for a larger population. So this can give us a lot more generalizable of a study because we're getting a larger sample size. However, this can be really difficult to do. When you're running studies, you want to make sure that you are having the same type of measurement tools in order to ensure that your variables are being measured the same. It can be really difficult and time-consuming to identify appropriate studies that can be measured in a meta-analysis together, and there can be some bias in selecting it. Right? If you're only looking for research studies that prove your point, and those are the only ones you filter through, your meta-analysis is going to support the conclusion you have. So it's really important that researchers are going to get more than just the studies that prove what they thought. They need to be including all ones that are possible. And sometimes, right, it's going to require more advanced techniques depending on the proportion of people involved, the populations. So this can be a bit complicated, though it does really help if there are studies that have been replicated time and time again with different populations to be able to combine them together because they're using very similar operational definitions and measurement techniques. All right, there are some different types of study designs that can go with these other research methods. So they're not standalone research methods, they're actually qualifiers in study design that can be applied to different methods. So we can have like a longitudinal experiment or a cross-sectional experiment. Longitudinal is when we are gathering data from the same subjects repeatedly over a long period of time, whereas cross-sectional, it saves us time because we're going to get little groups of people representing these different ages, and that's going to allow us to be able to get the information in a quicker manner. So say we want to study the differences in GPA for students at Round Rock High School over the 4 years. We could do a longitudinal study where we get students from freshman year and look at their GPA every single year, but that's going to take us 4 years to do. If we want the data now, we could do some cross-sectional research, and we could get a group of freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors and get data from each of them right now in the moment. Now I want you to think about what are some strengths and weaknesses of these, and we'll talk about that in class. So this is sort of our need to know summary. Make sure you know your different types of data, right? The different types of study designs, time-wise, our core research methods, and a little bit of these things about correlation, right? And the big thing, make sure we know our strengths and weaknesses.